Hey everyone, this is Turd Flinging Monkey. I want to talk a bit about the tyranny of the weak. Now, I made the point that if someone will turn to violence and crime unless you give them money, you're basically paying them off to keep them from turning to crime because there is no situation where they actually become productive, then there's no point in keeping them alive. Now, the response to this is very uniform. Whenever I run into someone who's very against my opinions, they basically come down to the fact that these people are going to try and rise up and overthrow and kill the people who aren't giving them what they want, so it's better to give them what they want. It's better to give in to their demands, it's better to give them some money and let them do their thing and reproduce and multiply than it is to just tell them to fuck off. But in the end, it came down to differences in basic philosophy. So in order to understand the different philosophies at play, let's have a little thought experiment. So in this thought experiment, imagine you're in some kind of control tower, and you control a train. Now this train is heading towards a cliff, and there are two tracks. So it can go to the left or the right. If it goes straight, it's going to go off the cliff, and 100 people are going to die. 100 strangers, you don't know any of them. So if you do nothing, 100 people die as this train goes over the cliff. Now if you pull a lever that makes the train go to the left, it's going to run over 10 people. And if you turn a lever that makes the train go to the right, it's going to run over 3 people. So what do? Now, knowing nothing about these groups of people, faced with the prospect of letting 100 strangers die, 10 strangers die, or 3 strangers die, it would be the best choice to choose the 3 strangers. You don't know who they are, and the choice involves the least amount of people dying. However, imagine you knew a little bit more about these groups of people. Now, the person I was arguing with in the comments section is basically a utilitarian. And this philosophy is basically summed up in the Star Trek quote, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." So whatever helps the most people is the right choice. I disagree with that. And I disagree with that because the character and the quality of the people at play is important. You can't just go with the most people because maybe that group of people are a bunch of fucking assholes who don't deserve your help. Now I want to describe a system. Now in this system, you have a ruling elite. And this ruling elite makes up about 5% of the population. And they exploit the lower 95%. So the 5% exploits the 95% for their labor, feeding off of them like parasites, using violence or threats of violence to keep them in line. Now, this system would be opposed by most people. Most people would say that a system where 5% oppresses the 95% is wrong and immoral. Using violence and threats of violence is wrong and immoral. Now imagine you have a different system, different in only one way. Now you have 51% of the population oppressing 49% of the population. The ruling elite now make up the majority of the population, and they use violence and threats of violence to exploit the 49%. Is this system any less corrupt, less immoral than the previous system? If you said yes, then congratulations, you're a utilitarian. I would argue they're exactly the same. Neither is objectively better or worse than the other. Both of them involve a group oppressing another group. It doesn't matter what the size of the groups are. It doesn't matter that in one case it's 5%, in one case it's 51%. The point is you have a group that's feeding off of the other group. And that's wrong. Unless you define what is right by majority rule or what helps the most people, without taking into consideration anything involving the character of these different groups. Some people are objectively worth more than others. Now, a lot of people really have an uncomfortable time with that. A lot of people think that everyone's equal. We shouldn't treat people differently, and nobody's better or worse than anyone else, but you're fucking stupid and you know it. If you really think about it, instead of just regurgitating what you've been taught by a gynocentric bullshit society, actually think about it. If everybody were equal, we wouldn't have job interviews. We wouldn't have tryouts. People know that equality is bullshit, and yet we regurgitate it and we recite it as a matter of religion, not because it actually reflects reality. And to return to our previous thought experiment, with the train and the 100 people and the 10 and the 3, imagine the 3 people were members of your family, loved ones, parents, siblings, whatever. And you love them and you're going to kill them to save the most people? No, clearly not. You're not going to let a train run over your family. You're not going to condemn them to death. You'll let the 10 die or you'll let the 100 die before you kill your own family because they're worth more to you. This is what pisses me off about egalitarians, and this is what I'm talking about when I say the tyranny of the weak. What these weak people do is they clothe themselves in moral superiority, as if their self-interest is somehow the moral high ground. Because they belong to the 51% and they benefit from a system which allows them to parasite off of the 49% or whatever percentages. And they make veiled threats, saying that, well, if you don't give these people money, they're going to rise up. And what are you going to do, kill them? Oh, that's terrible. People aren't going to do that. People aren't going to tolerate that. So you better just give in to their demands. You're not morally superior simply because your ruling elite is a larger group than the ruling elite that you condemn. And in addition, if you compare the quality of the people who make up these groups, the smaller ruling elite probably has a lot more going for it. They're probably actually going to make a more positive contribution to mankind than your ruling elite. Look what egalitarianism and democracy and everything has done to Western civilization. It results in everybody wanting to be the victim, people wanting more money, people just feeding off of each other. And they're never full. And they just cry, someone's going to take care of me. Or, oh, bad things are going to happen. You better take care of me. You can't do anything about it because we're just growing in numbers, so keep giving us money. Keep helping us reproduce. And we're just going to grow and grow in numbers, and we're going to make the problem worse. You better keep giving us money. And then when you run out of money, everything goes to shit. And you eat each other. Now, I want to read some passages from this essay I found online, written by someone named Patricia Michael. It's not professional or anything. I literally just found this online. But it's from an essay called Should the Weak Inherit the Earth? And part of it reads, quote, "The most sinister form of bullying arises from the tyranny of the weak over the strong. When the weak use their weakness, whether physical or psychological, real or feigned, to ensnare the strong, the traps that they set are far more devious, more durable than the direct confrontation of the playground bully. Using their weaknesses as weapons, these tyrants turn the virtues of the strong against the very people who seek to help them. In a cruel inversion, empathy and compassion make dupes out of the strong, while a lack of feeling and indifference completely alien to their natures become their only possible line of defense against coercion. Unfit for such coldness, the strong are frequently caught in a pattern of abuse, where giving in is met by interminable taking, where demands expand to a critical mass, where domination overpowers any genuine communication and foists responsibility onto the strong whose finely honed conscience makes them easy prey for their irresponsible counterparts." Unquote. Now, who does that sound like? It sounds like women and feminism and gynocentrism. Because men are stronger than women. But this even applies to men. You have weak men who want to act like women and feed off of other men the way women feed on men. It's like this pyramid where you have women and children and all the weakest people at the bottom. And then you have weak men wanting to feed off strong men. And at the very top, you have the strong men who have to fend off everybody. Everybody wants a piece. And they all think they're entitled to it. They all think that they deserve it. They all think that you're a horrible person if you don't give it to them. And they'll use guilt and shame and violence and threats of violence to get what they want. The only defense is indifference. You gotta give them 2 middle fingers and say, fuck you. Now later on in the article it makes another point. It says, quote, "While the weak seek power in a given situation, the strong seek meaning. Their aims are diametrically opposed. In fact, the weak in seeking to dominate others may often be evading meaning. Some feign weakness in order to avoid looking within themselves. They hide behind and assume fragility whenever others are getting too close to the inner person. It is as if they are saying, don't make me look at myself because I'll fall apart, I'll break. Children too feign weakness. When they do not want to be scolded, they may begin to cry simply to stave off being confronted by a parent. Frequently these ploys work with the soft-hearted, who may be afraid that the adult's fragility is real, or that the child's tears might turn to hysteria. Unwilling to suffer a painful scene or later pangs of self-reproach, they allow themselves to be victims of this petty tyranny." Unquote. The essay then begins to talk about Oscar Wilde. In one of his more famous quotes it reads, "The history of women is the history of the worst form of tyranny the world has ever known. The tyranny of the weak over the strong. It is the only tyranny that lasts." Unquote. Now whether it's gynocentrism or whether it's some form of socialist redistribution, it's the same goddamn thing. It's the tyranny of the weak. It's people who want to be taken care of, exploiting those who have the means to take care of them. Using weakness, using violence, using whatever it takes. And the reason why it's the only tyranny that lasts is because they believe that they're in the right. You know, a murderer or a serial killer or a horrible dictator, he knows he's an asshole. He knows what he's doing isn't morally right, but he justifies it anyway or just doesn't give a shit. Maybe he's a sociopath or a psychopath. But the weak who exploit the strong have their bullshit slave morality and not only justify their parasitism, but actually believe that they're morally superior to those they're preying off of. I mean, you see this with feminism. You see this with these women who think that they're entitled to men's money. They're entitled to these jobs they're not qualified for. They're entitled to all the privileges of society that men built and men maintain because they have vaginas and because they're women, because they're weak. They're just entitled to everything. And if you don't give it to them, you hate them. And if you do give it to them, then, you know, whatever, they're neutral. They're not even thankful. They don't even say thank you to these male feminists and these manginas who serve them. They actually look down on you and spit on you. But if you oppose them even a little bit, if you're just talking about like, you know, hey, maybe there should be equality, maybe not female superiority, oh, then you're a misogynist. This is the tyranny of the weak. Because they're just poor little women. You gotta give them everything they want or you hate them. They're just poor little women. But of course it doesn't just apply to women, it applies to any group that uses the same tactics to feed off of their fellow man. And lately I've been attracting these people who are very pro-welfare. And that's fine. And in fact, I understand why you believe that. I understand you have a slave morality. And in your own twisted world, you stand for the right. You stand for the little guy. You stand for the average dude. You're in the rights. You're the good guy. And I'm the bad guy. I'm the piece of shit. Because I actually take the quality of the people into account and don't just want to help the most people. Because what if they're pieces of shit? What if they're not actually advancing humanity in any meaningful way? What if they're just parasites and feeders? I mean, who's right? Obviously, we have a difference in philosophy. Should quality be taken into account when discussing the needs of the many versus the needs of the few? Or should the needs of the many always supersede the needs of the few? Honestly, which is better? A corrupt ruling class? Or an idiocracy? An oligarchy? Or an angry mob? Which one is better? Which one is more moral? They're the same thing. It's just the size of the people exploiting the other people. It doesn't make it better or worse when it's a majority versus a minority. Now, I don't expect to convert anyone to my way of thinking because you would have to question your basic foundational moral principles, which is a very hard thing to do, but I would just like some honesty. Just admit that you don't have some kind of moral superiority over me. You have self-interest. You want to feed off other people for whatever reason. Maybe you're weak, maybe you're disabled, maybe you're retarded, whatever. But it doesn't make you better than me. You're not entitled to my shit because you need it. I earned it, that means it's mine. And if you want some of my shit, then we can have an exchange. We can come to an agreement. You can provide some good or service to me in exchange for my shit. But you don't just get my shit because you're weak and poor, and if I don't give it to you, you're going to turn to violence. Well, if that's the way it's going to be, then come at me, bro. I don't give a fuck. And that's all I gotta say. So this is Turd Flinging Monkey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.